Let's now engage in an awareness exercise centered on the functioning of these brain networks. We'll start by revisiting the first of the two schemas we have discussed, where the default mode network, Salience Network, and the central executive networks alternate. As we have mentioned, these networks represent a way to manage the alternation between three modes. 1. Living the standard life, default mode network. This is when we are in a restful state, reflecting, or simply enjoying peaceful moments. 2. Responding to environmental changes, the Salience Network. This mode is activated when something disrupts the environment, and we need to decide whether to address it. 3. Managing the situation, central executive network. If necessary, this network activates to handle the situation before returning to a state of calm. When we consider adaptive processes through these networks, certain patient types may come to mind. For instance, those who say, "Why am I never at peace? I'm never calm." According to this schema, it's likely because their Salience network is perpetually active. They spend all their time scanning for potential dangers. Similarly, think of a hyperactive patient who says, "I always have to be doing something." They likely have their central executive network constantly engaged. This drives them to be more active than necessary, creating an illusion of control, but preventing them from living in the present, ultimately leading to burnout. It's important to remember that this third level of switch relies on the previous two. Thus, consistently being in Salience or executive mode increases allostatic load, leads to heightened inflammation, and results in significant psychosomatic harm. The default mode network, on the other hand, represents the physiological baseline, when everything is functioning well. As we have noted, this isn't always the case. The default mode network operates optimally when we are in a relaxed state, sitting in a chair, contemplating the fire, watching the waves, or enjoying hypnotic sounds. It's also active when we listen to music we love. However, many people sit in their chairs, with the music playing and a book in hand, seemingly in a default mode state. But in reality, they are intensely thinking about problems, conflicts, or disappointments. They might start by reading or enjoying the music, but soon find themselves spending an hour ruminating. "I made a mistake, I should have done this, not that, it doesn't understand me," and so on. In these cases, despite appearances, these individuals are using the Salience network, trying to determine whether something is a problem or not. Or they might be starting to identify solutions, thinking, "I should have said this, I could say this, I could do that," and so forth. These situations happen frequently, but people are rarely aware of them. Therefore, what we can do is practice an exercise of self-evaluation, both for ourselves and those we work with, on how we navigate between these three networks. Let's try this exercise together. We'll start with three simple questions. I'll ask you to remember these questions, then take some time to reflect on your answers. Afterward, we can discuss them and add in more depth questions if needed. Here are the initial questions. 1. In my average day, how much time do I dedicate to each network? Specifically, how much time do I spend in default mode, restful reflective state, Salience mode, analyzing problems and risks, execution mode, solving and taking action? Now, take a moment to review a typical day in your life. Think about what you do and what your mind is doing during those activities. As we mentioned earlier, the mindset is more important than the action itself. For example, brushing your teeth might seem like an execution activity, because you are doing something concrete to prevent cavities. However, you could do it calmly and meditatively, which would put you in default mode. Or your mind might be preoccupied with the worry of being late for work, which means your Salience network is active. Similarly, ask yourself, what am I thinking about while having breakfast? What is my approach? Am I already trying to plan out the rest of my day? Am I anxious about the presentation I have to give at work, the interview I need to attend, or the argument I need to resolve with a friend? So, our first goal is to take 10 minutes to reflect on these three questions. Consider the three networks and observe what your mind is actually doing. You might even create three columns and distribute your daily activities among them. In some cases, you might find activities that straddle two columns because, for example, you could be reading a book in default mode, but occasionally your Salience network might kick in to process problems. If you or your patients want to do a more detailed analysis, you could even assign a specific time to each activity. Otherwise, you can make a general assessment at the end, trying to estimate the percentage of time each network is active throughout your day. It can also be helpful to make a qualitative assessment of how you experience those moments. You might ask yourself in which network you feel most comfortable and in which you struggle. Which network is required by your job or family responsibilities, and which is perhaps just a personal preference or habit. Then, of course, we should ask whether that preference is genuine or merely a habit or a mode developed over time to cope with fears, trauma, or chronic stress. For example, are necessary activities like doing the laundry used to avoid thinking about your emotions, to avoid talking to your spouse, to avoid working attentively in a way that reinforces a self-perception of being worthless, or perhaps as a mechanism to avoid taking responsibilities and achieve independence. Interestingly, similar questions can be applied to activities like constantly checking social media, taking care of a pet, or other actions that might be labeled as taking a well-deserved break, being nurturing, or taking care of oneself. Now, take your time to complete this exercise.